a few thoughts on releasing judgment. I was standing in the hallway of my new school on a break during a professional development day for new teachers, and I listened to the nurse navigator as she relayed the news. You have cancer, and I know you're starting a new job and have limited time available, so I set up appointments with a surgeon and an oncologist for after school. I called my husband, and I knew there were others to call, but I needed to get back into the PD session. I returned to the classroom and went through the motions for the remainder of our day, while in my mind asking, why me? Why now? And then the self-judging took over. I compared myself to others, and I continued to ask why this was happening. I don't smoke. I don't drink. I run half marathons. I eat nutritious foods. I lost 50 pounds in 3 years and try to maintain a healthy weight. I go for my annual checkups. I'm healthy and I feel better than ever. Why me? Instead of trusting that it was all part of the plan for my life, I let fear rule, and I judged myself and my journey. It's easy to do and difficult to stop. I've been thinking more lately about judgment and ways and reasons for releasing it. Releasing judgment is an ongoing process, one in which I cycle in and out. When we judge ourselves, we bring more stress and suffering, thinking we're not doing enough, being enough, etc. We quote should on ourselves, telling ourselves what we should or should not do. Judgment comes from fear, a fear that we are not worthy, but we are worthy. By surrendering ourselves to a higher power, we can find inner peace and freedom from judgment. How do we release judgment? 1, we understand that we don't have all the answers. 2, we remain flexible and open-minded, accepting ourselves and others. 3, we change our language and avoid dwelling on our mistakes. 4, we practice compassion and remember that compassion and judgment cannot coexist. 5, we remember that we can't always believe what we think, especially about our need to be right. 6, we value individuality and uniqueness. What happens when we forget to do these things? We can avoid dwelling on the negative or the fact that we've fallen off track. Instead, we can acknowledge it, accept it, and move forward, forgiving ourselves and releasing judgment.
As you may know, October is Breast Cancer Awareness Month. According to breastcancer.org, as of January 2020, there are more than 3.5 million women with a history of breast cancer in the U.S. This includes women currently being treated and women who have finished treatment. And you, listener, have just heard one of them on the prologue for today's Choose to Think episode. Meet Renee Boss, a self-described reader, writer, thinker, runner, and teacher, as she shares her journey through the diagnosis and recovery stages of breast cancer, as well as the practical tools she used in order to cope, find health, and walk it all out with joy. She realized that although she could not control her breast cancer diagnosis, she could indeed control her response to it. Now, be sure to check out the show notes for Renee's blog site, Twitter, and Instagram links, and reach out to her and show her a little love or follow her. And if you know someone who's struggling with breast cancer, please share this episode link. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, would you please subscribe to the show, rate and review as well? This would really help me to spread the good news to others. Or if you're listening on YouTube, please be sure to subscribe to my channel there so I'll know that you're there. Visit victoriadwalker.com, opt in so that we can stay connected. And finally, the themed merch for this episode is Today I Choose Joy. Be sure to check out this design as well as many others in the Choose to Think Merch and More store. Okay, now let's tune our ears to Renee's story and welcome to the Choose to Think podcast. This is Victoria Walker. Let's go.
For inviting me. I'm happy to share my story. I will say that I my experience with breast cancer was probably different from a lot of other women who had a higher stage of cancer. I had early stage breast cancer that was caught in a routine mammogram, and thankfully, my journey wasn't as tough as others. I know that, but at the same time, it was difficult. Anytime I think you hear the diagnosis of cancer, it can stop you in your tracks and make you wonder what the plan is for your life. So I think it's important for me to mention, because this is a major part of my story. I was starting a brand new job, returning to the classroom after having been away. And so I was in the new school building, waiting for some results for the biopsy when I received the call. Fortunately, the breast cancer center I went to, had a nurse advocate who worked with patients pretty carefully, and she was the one who called me. So what was interesting is that I was trying to start this new job in the new school and make a good, solid impression professionally, which was really important to me. And then I received this news that I did have cancer. And so at the same time I was starting the new job and trying to go to professional development and get my classroom ready, I was also going to see oncologists and surgeons and more the nurse advocate who was trying to tell me everything that was going to be happening to me. And, I had a lot of support, and I think that is a major part of what helped me through that difficult time. From my family to my new assistant principal, she called me and she said, I want you to remember that we didn't hire you just for this year. We hired you forever, so please don't worry about it. I mean, just tremendous support. And then the people at my church were also really supportive along the whole way from diagnosis through the treatment. I started teaching, and there was not. It was not going to be okay for me to wait for fall break to have surgery. I needed to have a more immediate surgery. I did manage to wait until Labor Day weekend. Fortunately for me, I did not need a full mastectomy. I had partial mastectomy or lumpectomy, and they were able to remove the cancer cells, and the cancer had not spread to my lymph nodes, so I was very, very fortunate. After I had a chance to heal from that surgery, and I went back to, I had basically Labor Day weekend, and then I went back to school on Monday. It was just a pretty tough situation in terms of the way sick days were available and not available. And so I had surgery on a Wednesday, and I was back at school on a Monday. And like I mentioned a minute ago, my principal was pretty amazing in terms of supporting me through all of that and really checking on me to make sure that I would be okay. So after I healed from the surgery, I needed to have radiation. And the first time I met with the radiologist, I told her there was no way. There's, this isn't going to work for me, is what I told her. I was devastated. I was praying a lot. for wisdom and guidance and peace. I was praying for peace and for calm because the situation felt insurmountable, because the way radiation was going to work for me was that I needed to have it Monday through Friday every day. And the clinic where I would have the radiation was only open from 8 until 2 every day, and that interrupted everything with my teaching. And I couldn't miss 6 weeks of school to have radiation every day for 5 days a week. And so I again reached out to that assistant principal, who was an amazing woman, and she helped me arrange it so that I would basically leave school during a lunch/planning period that coincided, and I drove from the city where I was teaching back to the city where my doctor was and my radiologist was. I drove back during that time, went to the clinic, had my radiation treatment, and then drove back to school to finish teaching. And I guess, I would say about that, that also felt insurmountable. But ultimately, it was not. I had so much support. I had my daily, I've been a journaler and a morning prayer and devotional meditation time person for years. And I continued that even when I was tired, because I couldn't make it through my day if I didn't start my day that way. And so I continued making that daily drive and then driving back to school to finish teaching for the day, and then on home. And then I guess I should definitely mention that running played a big part in my recovery, in addition to my morning routine with meditation and prayer. I had the support from my radiologist to run through the entire time that I was going through radiation treatment. And she warned me that I would be extremely fatigued, but if I could push through that fatigue and keep up my exercise routine, that it would pay off. And I would say it definitely did. So in addition to my support from church and my support at school and my precious family, my husband and my 2 sons, and I also had the support of women in my running club who were checking out for me and supporting me in my journey to stay healthy, as healthy as I could in the middle of the daily radiation treatments. And so fortunately for me, after about 6 weeks of radiation, I entered into more of the recovery from radiation time, which continues to linger after you've had radiation. That the fatigue and the side effects will linger for a little bit, but not long enough, or not forever, compared to the journey that some other women might have, especially if they have to have chemotherapy. And I did not have to have chemotherapy, and I was grateful for that little piece in the midst of everything else.
You were stage 1, and can you tell me also what year this was?
This was in 2018.
But there you were at a regular mammogram, and so you got the results from that, or did the technician kind of say, at that time during that regular mammogram?
Oh, yes. Good question. So, routine mammogram. You go in. I had mammograms, a couple years prior for a baseline, which was good because, then they know what to be looking at. They, know what came before. So routine mammogram, and then typically you go and you sit and you wait for the results. And in the previous 2 times I had done this, the results, I would wait a few minutes and then everything would be fine. They were taking a long time to get the results to me. And I remember texting my husband saying, this is taking longer than usual. I'm starting to feel worried. And he was encouraging me, surely, it's just going to be nothing. And then they came and got me from the little waiting area. And they said, we actually want to do a few more pictures or images to have a better look. And so I went right then and had additional images taken, and something about those images made the radiologist feel like, okay, there's something that's not right here, so you need a biopsy. And so that did happen before I got that call for the results. I went for a biopsy, which in and of itself was, no fun when you're having a little piece of your body cut out of you. Thankfully there was the nurse advocate who was there with me and, talking me through the whole thing. But then you begin the waiting, and it took probably a couple days for the results. I think maybe, it took over a weekend to actually. I had that biopsy on a Friday, and I had to wait through the weekend until the next Monday for the results. So that was some waiting time that was not fun.
Oh, I'm sure. And let me ask you this question. Do you also, or prior to that, did you do regular self-examinations?
Yes, absolutely. And that's the thing. Like, I never felt anything different in terms of, like, I didn't feel a lump. You really couldn't feel it. You could only see it on the mammogram. But later, actually, a symptom that was strange was that I was extremely itchy in that area of my body, and I didn't know that was part of it, and I don't even know if a doctor would say that it's part of it. But since then, I've met a lot of women who have had breast cancer, and I'm in an online support group where we encourage one another and share experiences. And there have been women there who have said the same thing. So now that I know that, I think, okay, if I ever have, extreme itching, I may try to get things checked out as well. But I don't know that anything could have been seen any earlier than it was, because, it was a routine mammogram. You can only get them once a year. Even now, I can still only get it once a year. So every time I go now, I've been twice since I had my surgery, and both times it's very nerve-wracking waiting. But fortunately, those 2 times, the 2 times after, have been clear.
Mm. Everything that you've described sounds extremely exhausting to me. And a part of my ministry, even with the podcast, is processing our feelings, our emotions, and our thoughts. And sometimes, if you're like I am, it's a bit of a battle. I have to really work hard personally to kind of, take those thoughts captive and then submit them to the authority of God and say, okay, wait a minute, this is a thought that I'm having, which is producing this emotion, and maybe it's causing me to behave in a certain way even, or just bringing me down. So I have to, say, nope, I'm not going to go there. This is what I want to think about instead. This is how I'm going to pivot. And I wonder, Renee, I know you were at the school at this new job, and thankfully you had such a wonderful support system in place, and the principal was so kind-hearted and empathetic, and just sounds like a wonderful individual who was right off at the very beginning, your advocate and fighting on your behalf, so to speak. But what can you, I think, okay, if I were in your shoes, it would be hard for me probably to just not feel anxious, not feel stressed, not feel depressed. I think all of those are going to be rather natural and normal responses to this kind of news. But, and if, as well as you might remember, did you have those kinds of thoughts and feelings? Was there any, recurring thought even, or any emotion that you struggled with that you really had to kind of come to grips with? And were you intentional about that? Now, before we hear Renee's answer to that question, let's take a quick sponsor break.
I think definitely the full range of worry and definitely exhaustion. But so I don't know how much you want to know about this part of my life, but a couple years before I was diagnosed, I had another major life incident that I won't go into here, but that life incident prompted me to return to church after being away for about half a decade, actually. And I am grateful that I returned to God, so to speak, and to the church and to a life of prayer and gratitude before I had my cancer diagnosis, because I had a renewed sense of joy and an understanding that because of suffering and hardships that I had endured in my life, I could know a deeper joy, and that that was an important piece to me. And honestly, I'm kind of known in the last few years as someone who will, not just as a hashtag, but hashtag choose joy is like my thing. And I've been able to choose joy because of that previous life incident that really took me to the bottom of everything. And in coming out of that and making a conscious choice to know that I could not get through life without God. I could not go on the way that I was living. And so, and I don't mean to make that sound like, I don't know what I mean to make that sound like, but what I mean by the way I was living is that I was choosing work, I was choosing relationships and anything over God. And I was going through a period of questioning where everything that I grew up with and the deep personal relationship that I had when I was young, I was rejecting for the sake of professional pursuit. And that ruined everything for me, really, for a time, and I needed to return, and I was pretty sad that I had gotten so far off track, and then I was really sad that in some formidable years of the lives of my son is when I was off track, and it ended up being my older son who one day said to me, "Hey, can we go to church again?" And I took him to church, and even when I was there, I was still kind of trying to resist it, and I was like, I don't know what I'm doing here. Like, what is this all about? I'm not. This isn't part of my life anymore. But then the quiet, calming hymns and the meditation and prayer and just being in the environment reminded me, oh, I do need this, and I do remember what it was like to want this, even though I had a few years where I didn't. So that's a little bit of a backstory to tell you that when I was going through breast cancer, I had just recently, 2 years prior to that, had returned to God, basically, and church, and an understanding that I needed somebody bigger than me, who was all powerful, to help me cope with all of life. And then, part of that for me was I did a lot of work on mindset, and spent read a lot of books, did a lot of personal work on mindset, and that became kind of a reminder of how I really wanted to live my life, even though I had taken a break from remembering how I wanted to live my life. And so, because I've regained that memory of wanting to live my life in a place of light and joy, that helped me then when things were difficult during breast cancer. It helped me to remember that, there was suffering and there was hardship, but there was a power greater than me who was in control of everything. And remembering that, honestly, helped me cope with the day-to-day, because, it was a complete surrender. I couldn't control what was happening, and all I could do was control the way that I responded to what was happening. And I think that made my experience, one where I was thriving rather than just surviving. Now, don't get me wrong, there were days where I really was just surviving, just trying to make it through the day. But even when I was just trying to make it through the day, my attitude seemed to play a really big part in thriving more than just surviving.
Thank you so much for sharing that, the backdrop there and that story. And I'm just marveling at how, none of the any diagnosis that anyone may get never catches God by surprise. And some even go so far as to say, well, it's just a divine interruption in your life. And, it might be easy for me to say that, oh, that's just a divine interruption. But when you're on the other side of being the one divinely interrupted, it's a little bit harder to take in. But it sounds like God was just really preparing your heart those years before, like you so graciously shared with us, and setting some foundation there for you to be able to really cope under the shelter of his wings, so to speak, when this diagnosis of breast cancer would come those years later. So that's just a very sweet story to add to all of this, and I appreciate your transparency in sharing that. And I'm wondering what you might how you might encourage that individual who's been through a process. Maybe it's not exactly like yours, but they're on the other side of, and they're in the, I guess the recovery stage of that and just moving on with their life. But they have this thought, persistent thought that, gosh, it might, what if it returns? How would you counsel someone, or, what would you say to someone who has that kind of fear? And I don't know if you have that fear, but how do you handle it if you do?
Sure. Well, I would never even attempt to say that I understand how someone who had a harsher diagnosis would feel. What I do know, though, is that in the years when I wasn't maybe living the way I prefer to live now, I was consumed by fear. And I think that anybody who's had a diagnosis can continue to wonder and have that fear. And I would say, of course, that crosses my mind. But on a bigger picture, I work daily. I spend time daily in prayer and working to have faith and love be stronger than fear. And, I can't do that myself, obviously, because that is something that's going to require me to put my trust in hope in God and understand that He really is in control, and that living my life in fear is not the way I want to live my life. I want to live my life with faith and love and hope and joy. And, I think it really does come down to an individual attitude and mindset about your day-to-day living. And it's not saying I'm never going to be fearful. It's saying, okay, I'm feeling fearful right now. What can I do? What tools do I have to help myself not feel fearful? And I think it's not avoiding fear, because fear is just a natural part of being human. I think recognizing it, stating that fear is there, but then rising above that and choosing to remember your faith and your joy and your love over fear is the way that I think that you can get through life when there's a lot of unknown. I had a friend, a teacher friend, who also was going through breast cancer at the same time I was. She had a much harsher diagnosis than I did. And I know that even as we continue to keep up with one another, I've noticed that it's the day-to-day living that I see her exuberate, her day-to-day choices, and as one way of also coping with not living in fear.
But is there anything else, practically speaking, that you do to help yourself not go in the direction of fear? You recognize it, you acknowledge your humanness, but you don't want to, ruminate and stay stuck there. So what do you do, practically speaking, to pivot out of that?
So practically speaking, my journaling is a huge component. I can journal my way through a lot of really hard feelings. I do journal every morning, but even if I'm having a tough time, I will sometimes journal. I don't always have my journal with me, obviously. I don't carry it with me. It has too much personal stuff, and I wouldn't want anybody to find it.
That's right.
But other tools for me, I rely pretty heavily on mantras or short prayers. I call them mantras. I like it. They've been useful to me, but um, those mantras and short prayers really has been an important tool for me in um, moving beyond fear when I've felt fear. And I think so much about um, the thoughts we have are formed by, our beliefs are formed by the thoughts we have. And so if I continue to think these mantras that help me, then they help me through the fear. And then I don't have to believe the fear is the all powerful. I can believe that, there is something that is better than that. And so I would say journals and mantras. And then, honestly, for me, exercise is a huge component. It is a huge tool. And sometimes when I'm really struggling, I'll go out for a run or even a walk, and I can have an entire adjustment in my mindset.
Can you tell us what some of your mantras actually are or have been? Do you recall any off the bat?
Sure. I mean, one of my mantras is choose joy. Another is love over fear. Um, Love conquers all. And with love, just remembering like the bigger idea of love, and that we have that love because we were first loved by God, and we can rely on that. So choose joy, love over fear. Those are definitely two of my studies. Another important one for me has been I am enough and I have enough. The idea that kind of an abundance mindset, not in the term of wealth, but in the fact that I have everything I need, and just choosing to remember that I am enough because of the grace of God. I am enough, and so I would say those are some of my go-tos. There are probably some others, but they're not coming to my mind right off right now.
Okay. Oh, those are just beautiful. I'm also wondering, Renee, the impact of music. Is that another tool in your tool belt?
Music is really important to me. Music is kind of what first connected me to. Oh gosh, no, music has been part of my life my whole life, and also I would say it's one of the things that first connected me and my husband in terms of. Like our first date was going to see a Christian rock band called Vigilantes of Love down in Athens, Georgia. And music has continued to be an important part of my life. And a pretty wide assortment of music. I wouldn't say that I just listen to music if I'm having a hard time, though. So I don't know how much. I mean, I definitely think it can be a tool. I don't know that I use it as much as I could.
Yeah, I was just curious because it's a huge tool for me. And, like you said, exercising can help provide that pivot point for you, or you notice afterwards that your attitude, everything's beginning to shift a little bit in perhaps a more healthy direction. And exercise has so many other wonderful benefits as well. And by the way, I am astounded that you continue to run while you were having radiation. That is like, okay, mind totally blown. But for music, it's sometimes if I'm noticing the dip, or if I feel like I'm really battling this spiritual warfare, so to speak, as the battlefield, a lot of what we battle is right there in our minds. I notice that I just need to put on some praise and worship music And those words kind of just roll over me and help me to really shift my attitudes, my mindsets, and my emotion ends up better on the other side. And anyway, so I was kind of just curious about the impact of music on your journey as well.
I had some pretty thorough support through the Lexington Clinic, the Women's Breast Cancer Center, and the nurse advocate there. In fact, the nurse advocate at the Breast Cancer Center, she routinely arranged breast cancer walks, so like with the Susan G. Komen Foundation. And so I did keep running during my radiation. And in fact, one of the races I ran was a Susan G. Komen race. And I was on the team with the Lexington Clinic and the nurse advocate who supported me through my early diagnosis and surgery. So it was a pretty sweet moment to, like, take those pictures and cross that finish line and have her hand me my survivor medal. That almost makes me tear up even remembering that. Like my sister and her daughter, my niece, came from North Carolina to do that event with me, and my husband and son did it, and a good friend from church. Who would know that you're going to have that kind of connection with the medical center? But the woman, the nurse advocate there, was so phenomenal and really helped me stay connected to what was important to me, and then getting to run on her team for that Susan G. Komen race was pretty cool.
Wow. Yeah, I could feel that emotion in that too. I could just picture what that must have felt like. That was such a good word picture that just conjured up in my mind as well. So, well, I couldn't thank you enough for sharing your heart, Renee, and sharing so much of your story and agreeing to put this out there to encourage even one person who may not have a breast cancer diagnosis, but may have other kind of issues that they're dealing with, health issues, or even, spiritual issues, life hardships, anxiety, isolation, so many different things that we all at some point probably have to wrestle around with. And I'm hoping that listener who may feel a little bit on the, like, gosh, life is really tough for me right now, who hears this message and your story will say, maybe I can do this too. Maybe God will help me through this. And so thank you so much for sharing and for taking time out of your busy day to drop in and to encourage others with your story. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. I enjoyed talking with you.
I'd like to include one final thought from an email exchange with Renee. She wrote, quote, "We really don't know how much time we have on this earth, and while my cancer wasn't as advanced or as invasive as the cancer others experience, it was still frightening at the time to hear that original cancer diagnosis and to visit the oncologist and radiologist. Having breast cancer really did teach me to live life to the fullest and to not put off doing things that are important to me and to not take anything for granted." End quote. And coming back full circle to her words from the prologue, as she describes how we can be really hard on ourselves, judging the plight that we've been given in life, she suggests, quote, "By surrendering ourselves to a higher power, we can find inner peace and freedom from judgment." Now, before we pray, check out what Renee has to say about the Running Wife Club.
Well, I can't let the opportunity to mention my running club pass me by. The Running Wife Club, they supported me through my cancer journey. They supported me through my first marathon. This is a group of women who are everyday runners and walkers with goals and families and jobs and people who are ready to give back to the community as part of the running group. We support each other daily in a Facebook group that is private for members. We hold each other accountable. We encourage and support one another in our running and walking journeys. And we get training plans from Ashley, the running wife, and recipes and all the support you need. So if you were encouraged by my journey and you want a little support and accountability, I would encourage you to check out my running club, the Running Wife.
Father, we are so grateful that you are our refuge and our strength when our journeys here on this earth are filled with struggles, hardships, and what seem to be insurmountable obstacles before us. We thank you that we are never alone in our battles. Your word teaches us that it is your joy that is our strength. And for that battle-weary listener, I pray, Lord, that you would download directly into their hearts and minds your joy and your peace today. Thank you, Father, for giving us your Son who defeated death and serves as a bittersweet reminder that we too are more than conquerors through Jesus, who loved us just that much, and nothing can separate us from your love. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you again for tuning in, and until next time, Dios primero y que Dios te bendiga. Ciao.